On September 26, 2025, the United Nations General Assembly became the stage for one of the most uncompromising speeches delivered by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Speaking to a hall divided by decades of conflict, Netanyahu issued a stark warning, accepting the creation of a Palestinian state, he declared, would be nothing short of national suicide for Israel. His remarks came just days after several Western countries, including the United Kingdom, Canada and Australia, joined in recognizing Palestine as a state, a move meant to push forward the long-stalled peace process, but one that Netanyahu framed as a grave danger to Israel's future. The atmosphere inside the General Assembly reflected this deep divide. As Netanyahu began his address, some delegates rose in applause, showing support for Israel's right to defend itself. Others stood and walked out in protest, leaving behind rows of empty seats, a silent display of dissent that underscored the growing international rift over Israel's policies. Unfazed by the mixed reaction, Netanyahu pressed ahead with his message. Early in his speech, he delivered one of his most controversial remarks, directly criticizing the recognition of Palestinian statehood. In his words, "You know what message the leaders who recognized a Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off." The statement drew immediate condemnation from Palestinian representatives and several international delegates who called it inflammatory and unhelpful for any path to peace. Yet for Netanyahu, it was a deliberate warning that rewarding Palestinian statehood under the current conditions, while Hamas still operates, would embolden further violence rather than end it. Netanyahu's address was not aimed solely at diplomats in the room. In an unusual and symbolic move, parts of his speech were broadcast live through loudspeakers positioned along Israel's border with the Gaza Strip. This broadcast was directed at the Israeli hostages still held by Hamas, a reminder that their plight remains a central focus for his government. Turning his words to those captives, Netanyahu adopted a personal, resolute tone. He said, "Our brave heroes, this is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking live from the United Nations. We have not forgotten you, not even for a second. The people of Israel are with you. We will not falter and we will not rest until we bring all of you home." The message resonated with many Israelis watching at home, reinforcing his commitment to the return of the hostages. It also highlighted the ongoing humanitarian and political crisis that continues to drive Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Throughout the speech, Netanyahu rejected accusations of genocide in Gaza, accusations that have been leveled against Israel by some international organizations and human rights groups. He instead framed Israel's actions as necessary defensive measures aimed at dismantling what he called a persistent terror machine. Citing recent operations, Netanyahu claimed Israel had achieved a series of strategic victories over the past year. Among these, he pointed to covert Israeli strikes against Iran's nuclear infrastructure and the high-profile assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. These actions, he asserted, demonstrated Israel's resolve to protect itself against regional threats. He further declared that Israel had destroyed most of the terror machine of Hamas, adding that his goal was to finish the campaign as quickly as possible. Netanyahu's remarks underscored a central theme, that Israel's security could not be compromised, even under intense international pressure. His defiant tone drew both praise and criticism. Supporters argued that his position was rooted in the reality of Israel's security needs, especially after the traumatic October 7th attacks. Critics countered that such rhetoric hardened divisions and undermined efforts for a two-state solution. Observers and diplomats noted that the speech marked a significant escalation in the strained relations between Israel and several key Western allies. Recognition of Palestine by countries like the UK, Canada and Australia had been framed as a move toward peace and reconciliation. But Netanyahu described it as rewarding those who resort to violence, a perspective that places Israel at odds with much of the international community seeking diplomatic solutions. The timing of the speech was equally significant. Nearly a year had passed since the October 7th attacks, which Netanyahu described as Israel's darkest day. Those attacks by Hamas left deep scars and propelled Israel into a prolonged military campaign in Gaza. For Netanyahu, the memory of that day, combined with the continuing hostage crisis, served as a central argument against the immediate recognition of a Palestinian state. Beyond addressing his critics abroad, Netanyahu's words were aimed at his domestic audience as well. By highlighting military successes and portraying himself as steadfast in the face of international pressure, he sought to reinforce his leadership at a time when Israel faces political turmoil and criticism over the human cost of the war. Reactions to the speech outside the UN were swift and polarized. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators denounced Netanyahu's comments, describing his tone as incendiary and counterproductive to peace efforts. Meanwhile, pro-Israel supporters praised his resolve and saw his defiance at the UN as a defense of Israel's right to security and survival. The remark, "murdering Jews pays off," became the most widely discussed and criticized line from the speech. Diplomats from several countries described it as a dangerous oversimplification, warning that such rhetoric could further inflame tensions and hinder dialogue. Still, for Netanyahu, the statement reflected his belief that rewarding Palestinian statehood at this juncture would only incentivize further violence. Amid these geopolitical debates, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza remained an ever-present backdrop. The ongoing bombardment, civilian casualties, and urgent calls for a ceasefire formed the context in which Netanyahu's words were delivered. Humanitarian organizations warned that the continuation of hostilities would deepen the suffering of civilians, while Israeli officials maintained that dismantling Hamas's capabilities remained their priority. For many listening around the world, Netanyahu's speech encapsulated the dilemma at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict: the tension between security concerns and the pursuit of peace through a two-state solution. While some leaders argue that recognition of Palestinian statehood is a necessary step toward lasting peace, Netanyahu portrayed it as a fundamental threat to Israel's existence. As the assembly came to a close and delegates departed, the day's events underscored just how far the international community remains from consensus on resolving the conflict. Netanyahu's address reaffirmed Israel's hardline stance that peace cannot come at the expense of security, and that as long as Hamas retains power and continues hostilities, Palestinian statehood remains, in his view, unacceptable. The speech will likely be remembered as one of Netanyahu's most forceful and defiant appearances at the United Nations. His words, both to world leaders and to the hostages in Gaza, were framed as a promise that Israel would persevere in its campaign until the threat posed by Hamas was eliminated and its citizens were safely returned. Ultimately, Netanyahu left the podium having drawn a stark line in the sand. No compromise on security, no immediate recognition of a Palestinian state, and a continued military campaign until what he calls the job is finished. In doing so, he set the stage for continued debate and perhaps deepening divisions on the future of the Middle East peace process. The address ended not with a call for reconciliation, but with a reiteration of his core warning that accepting a Palestinian state under current conditions would, in his words, amount to national suicide for Israel. As the UN lights dimmed and the world's leaders returned to their capitals, the speech's impact lingered, leaving both allies and opponents contemplating the stark choice Netanyahu had laid out: security first or diplomacy now. This speech, delivered at a moment of ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis, will likely shape international discussions in the months to come, highlighting the enduring challenge of balancing security, peace, and the long-sought goal of a two-state solution.